Hi, it's Christy of So to Speak, and welcome back to the So to Speak Closet series. Okay, I'm about to say a word, and I want you to check and see what your first reaction is to it. Ready? Self-care. So chances are you either were somewhere along the spectrum of, oh yeah, self-care, I'm into it, or you were rolling your eyes. So it's a big spectrum. So you might have been somewhere in between. We hear self-care all the time. There's hashtags, there's articles, there's strategies, but rarely do we hear what self-care really means to everybody, because it's way beyond manicures, pedicures, and bath salts, right? So within the So to Speak community, self-care is soul care. It is preventative. It is not reactive. It is not a luxury. It is something that we take very seriously, in the sense that it is part of what allows us to do the work we love to do. It regenerates our energy. It allows us to practice what we're preaching and model for our children, for our coworkers, for our direct reports, for our community members, that it is so essential for us to take care of ourselves, and how taking care of ourselves inevitably allows us to take care of the rest of the world. It's that simple. And there is no better guest to bring it all home than our next guest in the closet, Miss Deb Crowe. Deb Crowe is an executive coach and the host and producer of the podcast series Heart Centered Leadership. Deb and I discuss the essential need for self-care, and again, soul care. It's soul care. Deb really jumps in with clear examples from her own clients who have had the courage to show their humanity and their humanness to their teams, and the benefits of that, as well as why Deb has shifted to have much more of a focus on preventative care with clients. And she goes right into that, and is just, I'm so grateful that she was able to be so honest and real and intimate in our conversation. And I really feel like you're going to take so much from this that you'll be able to apply to your life right away. And I would love to know what you took from it. So what you listened to our conversation, what stood out the most to you that you feel like you could put to practice? So let me know. You can check me out on LinkedIn under Christy Mandor Lanuza. You can follow us on Instagram at So to Speak, SOW, So to Speak. And let us know, because we want to make sure that what we're providing for you is benefiting you. That's the whole point of the Closet series. Okay, so without further ado, please sit back and relax and enjoy our conversation.
A healthy culture within an organization is only healthy based on the behavior of whoever's leading the ship. So whoever's at the helm, if they're leading with utmost heart-centered leadership qualities, there will be time for them to put in emotion. I'll give you a great example. I have a beautiful CEO that I work with. She has 3 small children. Her husband passed away last year of cancer. Can't even fathom. And on one of her calls, she said to her team, so imagine this, sitting at your dining room table. Let's give your listeners a real visual here. You're sitting at your dining room table with your laptop on Zoom with your team. And in front of you, you've got 3 little kids on their iPads who you're homeschooling, and the dog and the cat and whatever else going on. And what I've coached her is she can own the moment and still be herself. You can't control the environment when you've got 3 small children and animals and you don't have someone there to co-parent with you. She's grieving. She has no family that lives close to her. And I said, just be yourself. So on the beginning of this call, this was halfway through COVID last year. I said I wasn't going to say it, but I did. Halfway through phase 1. She said to her team, how is everyone doing today? And we were trying to get that recrafted instead of how are you doing? How are you feeling? So she caught herself. She said, I'm going to reframe that. How's everyone feeling? They went around and did their little morning powwow. And then she said, I am not feeling great today. And I really, really want to cry. So if it's okay with all of you, I'm gonna. And they had a little cry fest. I cannot tell you the paradigm shift that has gone through her team, which was healthy and vibrant and just an amazing team because of who she was before. But now that she's leaned in a little bit to share how she's feeling, giving a snapshot of her home front, because everyone was checking in and asking after the death of her husband, it doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're vulnerable. It doesn't mean that you're giving up your armor of leadership. It means that you're leaning into a pivotal time in our careers, in our businesses during crisis management at its best, global, phase 3. And it was just such a beautiful moment when she described this to me, and she did it through another good crying. And I said to her, how do you feel after this? And she said, I just feel proud. I was proud that I finally stepped into that living in the now that you always talk to me about, and we coach and work through it. But she said, for the first time in my life, I felt like my emotions caught up with the rest of all of my skills. And I was like, goosebump moment.
So that story is beautiful, and I love that you just painted it in such a visual. You can see the whole thing, you can feel the whole scene,
Mhm.
and you're saying that it sounds like what you're saying is that since she has created that foundation of skills, she was able to lean into her emotions without feeling like getting just overwhelmed by them and consumed by them, lost in them, which there's a time and a place for that too. But clearly when you're running a business and you have people looking to you, it can't be a poker face, but at the same time, it can't be, you don't want a hot mess to be the person in charge. So because she was able to have that skill set, she was able to show her emotions in a conscious way, a way that she was choosing versus it taking the driver's seat.
I think she was, I think she was putting the logic and the emotion in the same equation and on the same line and making them parallel.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was showing that when we remove our business cards and our titles and our job descriptions, we're all people at the end of the day, and we all have feelings, and we're all processing and reacting to different things at different times. And I think it was just that allowance of her leadership to kind of say, I'm here, I see you, I feel you, I value you, but more importantly, I'm validating you because I'm right there with you. And I think that is transformational. I think it's pivotal. I don't think it's weak. I have other leaders that say, we shouldn't be doing that. Why not? And I challenge people on that. Why not? We are not robots. I always joke about artificial intelligence, and people say, well, it's coming. No, it's not coming. It's it's so part of every part of our daily lives and every activity we have in our daily lives. But at the end of the day, artificial intelligence needs data. Science needs data. And if we don't have people, we don't have data. If we don't have data, we're not going to keep migrating and being transformational with AI. So people are always going to be at the foundation of everything that we do, whether it's technology based or not.
It's so true, and I love the way that you shifted perspective on that, because everybody looks at it like AI is taking over, but you're looking at it like, oh well, hold on a second, it's going to be there because it is already there, but people are much more necessary and essential than we're giving ourselves credit for. So it's such a beautiful segue to just get a very clear definition on what you believe that only humans can do. I don't care how much AI you have out there advanced, and what heart-centered leadership is. What's that definition for you, Deb?
Oh, it's easy. Heart-centered leadership is honoring your connection with people, period.
So I love the idea of honoring your connection with people, and that seems overarching, and at the same time it's so unique to each person because it has so
Mhm,
much to do, I would think, with like what people value, what's important to them, their
mhm,
whole backstory. Like there's so many components to it, yet the
mhm,
feeling of being connected is so universal and
mhm.
transcends language, transcends gender, transcends race. So why is it that there's a tendency for people to kind of go, oh, heart-centered leadership, that's a little, it's a little soft. Like, what do you mean? When the magnitude that's behind it literally is transformational for the workplace. Why do you think there's so much resistance to it?
I think it's, if we look in my generation, so I'm right after the baby boomers. I think the baby boomers plus the Gen X, I think it's our education. I think it's our upbringing. I also think there's a big value of generational education. You know, it's kind of like, well, my grandfather did it, and my grandpa did it, my dad did it. And when do you draw the line in the sand and say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore? And I think it's individual because we have such a wide population and there's no barriers to global connection anymore with the internet. We have to change with the times. And yes, leadership, you know, when I did my business education and leadership, there is that wall of armor that you're to have on your chest. But nobody ever said that you couldn't lower it and get rid of that wall of resistance and be open and listening. And as you would say, not have it be overzealous or be considered it to be overarching. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what sector we're in. If you don't connect with people and develop trust and rapport, what do you have?
I mean, it's so, I mean, beyond, especially yes, with data for sure, it's research backed, but it's just so naturally, common sense wise, connected to morale, engagement, productivity, which leads to profitability, obviously. It makes so much sense. And you really just bringing up about generation, I feel like that goes right in line with that phrase that makes so many people cringe is, well, it's the way we've always done it. It's that group think mentality. So it's like generational in our family lineage, but also in our business lineage. Like, well, all of a sudden 20 years later, like, well, that's the way we've always done it. And sometimes you need that, I think they're called positive disruptors, that
Mm-hmm.
term, to
Mm-hmm.
come in, like the new hire or someone who's kind of shifted internally and they're like, wait a second, why are we doing it like this? And change is so scary for so many people. So how would you suggest people even dip their toes into shifting culture? This might be too grand of a question, but you can break it down. Just if their culture at work is very stuck in cobwebs and there really maybe hasn't even been a light shined on it, how would you even what would you offer to leaders who want to dip their toes in having to be more of a heart-centered leadership culture?
It's a big question and it depends on what level, but you have to have an open conversation and it's got to be raw and there's got to be emotion that has place and asking really, really good questions. When you ask really good questions, you get sometimes really good answers. And then that allows us as coaches to be super deductive and figure out, okay, what's really going on here? A lot of times when I'm asking someone question in this context, I will close my eyes and I will take my listening to another level. And when we can listen attentively to the point where if you do close your eyes, you will hear the emotion. And the emotion gives you a baseline to start another conversation. But going back to what I said at the beginning, dysfunction in culture, you know, to the point where change management's getting involved, we always have to be mindful. And I'm going to say, have a level of adherence to go back to the leadership because everything stems from that and the behavior of the leadership and the decisions of the leadership. And they have to have an accountability part in this too.
You are taking the words out of my, it's like you're reading my mind. I'm just seeing a red flashing accountability, accountability. Speak to that, please. I feel like that is just paramount. It's a foundation.
It's paramount, but I also want to just preface it by saying everyone thinks that the leaders know everything, that, their frontal lobe is Google 24/7. It's not. They're people. They're like us. They've achieved, they've done well. They don't know everything. And it's really important for them that they manage two levels of management that people don't even talk about: intuition management and energy management. And when they manage those two levels of management, it allows them to think better. It allows them to write and speak and lead better. They don't know everything that you're asking them. So the leader that can lean in and say, you know what, I don't know. The beginning of COVID, what do I tell my people? I don't know. How about I am only telling you what I know in this moment. I will update you accordingly. Nobody planned to be where we are. Nobody thought we would be here this long. So it's just a very interesting dynamic of timeline. Leaders that have been leading well planned for this. Leaders that are still kind of waffling and struggling, they're still planning in it, but now they're getting smarter and planning for the next crisis that could happen. Just because they thought we would never be here, not a good place to be. But to go back, just to anchor your point, just because someone's in a leadership position with a fancy title and a nice office and lots of initials after their name, they're not a robot. They're not heightened AI. They're a person. And we can't know everything about everything all the time, which is why the leader has a team. So a good leader will lean on his team and has fostered and built his team with skills and abilities in areas that they don't have. So they only have to oversee, manage, and lead that team. But I think when they can get really vulnerable and exercise their own self-compassion and empathy for self, I think it takes away a term that a lot of people don't think about. And we hear the term gaslighting. There's a lot of self-gaslighting that goes on. And it happens a lot amongst leaders. And it's pretty much the cousin to imposter syndrome. They have to work really hard to stay in that space, and saying they don't know, they're always worried about being perceived as weak or judged or observed that they don't know what they're doing. The ones that can just, instill some humor or take a pause and just say, I'm not really sure, I don't know, has more respect from the management, the team leads, the executives looking up to them. So it's kind of a multifaceted answer because it's such a big question, and it's perceived and dealt with and managed in so many different ways. But that would be kind of my scaling over Cole's notes view of how to answer that.
Yeah, and I'm hearing also, that sense of credibility that the leader gets when they say, I don't know, because there's such an innate confidence in that. I'm sure you're familiar with Adam Grant, the organizational
Mhm,
psychologist, right? And
mhm.
he just came out with his newest book. The name's escaping me, Think More or Think Again, or I think it's Think Again. And he has this beautiful phrase called confident humility. And
Mhm,
it's just exactly like what you're saying. It's just
mhm,
having that faith in yourself while
mhm.
also being humble enough to say I don't know in a confident way, right? It's so true. And I have a few questions to jump off of that because you offered it was such a rich response. What would be, going back to what you originally were talking about when you said that the power of questioning, right? Question, not interrogating. I don't want to make it sound like that, but the power of questions, real
Mhm,
curiosity and
mhm.
inquisitiveness. What would be one question that you feel like this is a go-to? If you don't remember any of the other questions, this is one question that you can have in your back pocket to at least initiate the conversation among your team.
I think it's a question, but I think it has to be prefaced by a statement.
Okay.
And I always encourage my leaders to let their teams know that yes, it's common sense, but it's not common practice. And it's not common practice because here we are at this intersection having this conversation.
Mhm.
So it's going back to the check-in. Whenever something falls off the rails or there's a disarray, or we'll use the culture example because we've been chatting about that, somewhere in the lineage, in the transaction, in the work, there was a shift. And it was done by someone's decision to have a differing opinion. So my question is always going to lean back to the check-in. How are you feeling about this? And would you tell us a little bit more as to why you feel that way? Once you can get out, Adam Grant frames this beautifully. He calls it cognitive entrenchment. When you can figure out the why behind the feeling that developed the thought, which demonstrated and expressed the behavior, then you're getting to the root of the problem. And a lot of times people think it's a personal attack on them. And it's one little cog in the lineage of all the wheels and everything that's turning. Somebody misconstrued, because who doesn't misconstrue emails, right? We don't speak like we write. We just don't. It sounds counterintuitive. I could write an email to you and you could misconstrue it to be completely different than what my intent is to speak to you face to face. So misperception, misconstrued information. We have to get to the feeling, which is the root, which is the anchor that set off kind of the alarm, if you will, to the situation at hand. Once you can ask good questions and find out where the emotion rose to the top, rose to the surface, then you can work backwards. And that's a good leader when they can just lean in and listen, and then they're able to pull out and kind of dissect what the next question is going to be once that person's done speaking. And I always ask people, I call it the Barack Obama pause, because I love when he's asked a question, he pauses for at least 5 to 10 seconds. We all have 5 to 10 seconds. So just because you're asked a question doesn't mean that you have to go right into being verbose and be nervous about it. Think about what you're going to say. Think about how you're going to say it, because the emotion that you put into what your verbally expression really sends a message to your coworkers, whether we're on Zoom, on the phone, face to face, in an email. Languaging, regardless of your title, is so important. And I think when we can get to the root of that emotion, it helps shape the language so that we can move forward and kind of get things clicked back in and back on track.
I love the Barack Obama pause. It makes me think of that acronym in the coaching world. It's very popular. Wait, why am I talking? And I always say to clients, like, go low stakes. Start at the grocery store. Like, start with someone where it's neutral. The mail carrier, like whatever it is. One of your kids' friends' parents, like where you don't feel like you're so put on the spot. Just practice the 5-second wait, even like when the phone rings before you answer it, just because it's a muscle, right? And so if you start with the lower stakes, and I want you to speak to this if you're agreeing or disagreeing, but like if you start with the lower stakes, you're building the same muscle so that when you're in the hot seat or in the boardroom or on the Zoom call, you're going to have practiced it so much that it'll feel so much more comfortable to do the pause.
I'm a yoga teacher, so I think our superpower is our pause. I think our superpower is taking that breath and embracing silence for self. And it also demonstrates to other people that you're not impatient and you don't have to answer to answer. We all have room to breathe in our day. I don't care how busy you are. I cannot stand the word busy because it's not intentional. Take the time to breathe, even if you just need the moment. It's okay to take it. What's 5 seconds in the scheme of things?
And it's modeling for your team, right? So if you're a leader who actually is putting this to practice, which is another thing too that I would love for you to speak to, when you were talking about the intuition and energy management and the self-gaslighting that came right after that, I do think they're interconnected, right? Because if you're so in your head, there's no room for intuition or embodied self-awareness. You're going to have no idea how you're fully showing up because you're camped here. So so many leaders that I speak to, they often feel like they have so much going on, right? So doing anything for themselves seems either irrational, moot, selfish, letting people down, when it seems consistently that it goes back to even like with parenting. Model what you want. They're going to do what they're seeing you do. So if a leader's saying totally take a mental health day, like, of course, certain leaders have more responsibilities that comes with the job, but if they're like encouraging it, but they're running ragged and they're sending emails at 1 a.m, chances are the direct report's not going to be taking a mental health day. If anything, it's going to create more mental health distress because they're going to have this cognitive dissonance of, wait, I'm being told one thing, but I'm so not seeing that being modeled. So can you speak about the importance of modeling when it comes to taking the breath and slowing down?
It's all encompassing. It's self-care. And my favorite hashtag is self-care isn't selfish. It's one of the reasons I created the Women's Self-Care Conference, because women, especially, not to segregate, but they think it's greedy or they shouldn't be doing it. Again, there's that generational value interpretation. They've made it a habit. If we don't take time for ourselves every day, I'll use my own life. I'm not a great woman. I'm not a great wife. I'm not a great mom, friend, sister, aunt, coach, all the different hats that we wear. We have to start our day with a non-negotiable morning routine. And like I said earlier, there's days that I don't want to do it, but I do it because I know when I get on the other side of it, when my cup is full, when I set an intentional day and I know what's coming for my day just unfolds beautifully. And then if anything gets thrown in that's extra or goes awry, it doesn't really bother me. I don't get kind of sidestepped. Logic over emotion. So self-care for me, I don't know if you know my story, but the biggest reason I don't do disability case management anymore is because I lost 5 executives and I sat with them all in hospice. And it was so funny because my name has never been my name. My whole name is one word. It's like Deb Crowe, or my name gets used as a verb and it'd be like, well, just Deb Crowe it. We used to sit and laugh in hospice at the end of their life. And I said to them, if you went back, what would you do different? Speak my truth? Because I didn't. And I jeopardized stature and success for climbing, the proverbial ladder to the top in a toxic environment. And when they all asked me to Deb Crowe it, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I was going to do. And it took me a year. And that was 10 years ago, because I was in that generalist space managing and helping all these sick executives and C-suite leaders. And then when those 5 went from a short-term disability stress claim to long-term disability to palliative and then died, I thought, this is wrong. I need to be a preventionist. So, long answer to get to the root of this, but the case manager shows up in the coaching sessions because the generalist, there's no space for. The preventionist is who we are as coaches, but everything you did up until you became a coach, you've packed that into your leadership arsenal and you pull out different tools as well. And that's the beauty of having so many coaches. And I hear so many people say it's a saturated market. There is not enough of us. There's a lot of people that live on this globe and need us right now. There is not enough of us.
I agree with you so wholeheartedly. And honestly, Deb, that was such a beautiful full picture of that answer because it's the reality. Like,
Mhm.
yes, we are all going to die. And at the same time, how do you want to spend your life while you're alive? And so
Mhm.
giving that perspective on how you shifted gears and how your focus became so much more preventative, it makes so much sense. And I agree with you in regards to hearing everybody's a coach, everybody's a coach. Okay, not everybody's the same coach. And someone who would come to me or someone who would go to you or someone who would go to my friend Kelly or my friend Sarah, we're all different. We all have beautiful respect and love for each other. And at the same time, we're all different. So that's the wonderful thing.
Mhm.
But for anybody who's listening, who kind of feels like, oh, I want to get into coaching, but beyond just following your heart, which sounds like such a hallmark response, but I believe it wholeheartedly. It's also like, think about it. I mean, I have a theater background and I always go to like, what would happen if like Meryl Streep was like, oh, the world doesn't need another actress. You know, Daniel Day-Lewis was like, screw it. We don't need any more actors in the world. Like,
Yeah.
think about these movies and these pieces of art that you saw. Like Da Vinci was like, no one needs another painter, or, you know, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
where would we
Well,
be?
it's like, what if McDonald's said, okay, we're not going to make hamburgers anymore, or Burger King? Like, it's a mood, it's a funny example. I'm being
I
facetious,
can't even
but
imagine.
there's enough room for everyone. And I call it life by design. And I truly live that every single day.
Mhm. You do, and you practice it, and following you on LinkedIn, I love it because you do, and that's how we connected and reached out. I was like, hey, let's just meet. There was not even like an initial, hey, be a guest on the series. It was more like, I was just interested. I was like, I want to know more about this Deb Crowe, which you are a total full name.
It's one word. See, it's one word.
You're full name. You are a full name person. And I'm just so grateful for you. You're so passionate and grounded in your passion. It's not so up here, it's just very deeply rooted, which is so beautiful to see. And I would love just to close out our session with, there's so many leaders out there who really don't know where to start. So DEI is a whole other conversation, but you're talking about starting conversations that are uncomfortable to really be able to just pull the blinders off, chew through the fat, and be like, okay, now we can get somewhere. Because how would you recommend leaders going about it? Because my gut feeling is to bring in a third party, right? Like a coach or a facilitator, but I would love your perspective on how you feel like it, in your experience, the most successful workshops like that have been run to start the conversation.
So we're talking about shifting a culture,
Exactly.
or so for me, with my background in neuroscience, my assessment gives a really deep dive for that, because when you can help someone with how they think about things, what thought they bring to things, because a good example I think will be to say, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, okay, I'm in a bad mood, I'm going to go into work and just be a jerk today. So when HR or VP of HR, or it's usually not a C-suite, it's someone on the executive team, will say, we're really having a hard time with Christy and something's going on. I always say, have a conversation. Don't just bring me in. Have a conversation. How are you feeling? What's going on with your life? You know, has something changed? Is there any barriers? How can I help? Just soft, not in your face kind of questions. Just have a nice conversation. Within those three questions, how are you feeling? Is there any barriers, in your life, or things that aren't going, the way you want them at work? How can I help? You're at the helm, but it doesn't mean you can't be beside them, holding their hand, helping them through something. To me, that's a really amazing heart-centered leader. And it's kind of like the guy who treats the janitor and the CEO the same. Great analogy. So don't get blindsided by title and stature, because I always joke and say we all wake up in the morning and put our pants on the same way. A lot of times, a heartfelt, genuine, trustworthy, offering that safe environment, knowing that they can have this conversation and not have to preface it by saying, can I talk to you? Is this going to land up in my employee file? Because that visceral fear is real for people, especially since the onset of COVID. And if you can't have a heart to heart with your boss and know that, and this has happened, it's going to get misconstrued and land up in your file, and then an HR person is going to talk to you about it during a performance review, you've just undone that bond of trust that you had, or you misconstrued relaying that information, And again, it happens because people don't listen.
And it's so real. And I love that you just hit that. If you're not ready to have that conversation, don't have it. Like read and I would say, and I want you to speak to this just to bring it all home, that C-suites executives who may feel uncomfortable having those conversations, I find that it helps when they do have a coach because they're able to then be vulnerable in a safe space that's very personal, very private, so that they know what it feels like. So then they can in turn hold the space so much more authentically when they're in the reverse seating. Do you tend to find that as well?
I do. And what most people don't realize is they're extremely lonely. And whenever you're looking to do something, always know and keep in the back of your mind and engraved in your heart, everything that you think of or where you want to go, it all comes with a price. So a lot of these people get to the top and they have sacrificed their health, like those 5 beautiful humans I lost 10 years ago, their marriage, they have a strange relationship with their children or grandchildren. So don't be so quick to judge because the corner office, the fancy car, the business suit, you may think they have it all. They don't. But what is your interpretation or definition of all or even success as a whole? And when I'm asked that question, success to me is life by design and honoring who I am, my health first, my physical health, my emotional health. Because when I have that at 100%, I never go into emotional overdraft. Because when we go into emotional overdraft, frankly, that's when the shit hits the fan. Can we say that on your podcast?
Totally.
The shit hits the fan when we're not doing our own due diligence for our own self-care. So when you don't model that, how do you expect your team to follow?
Such a perfect way to end it. Such a perfect way to end it. And we have to have you back because we didn't even touch upon your heart-centered leadership podcast. So I just want to give you one last plug for that, but I also want to say, like, leaders who are out there who do happen to be at the quote unquote top and are feeling that sense of lonely or despair or confusion, just not knowing which way to turn, the spectrum's very long. So wherever you fall, definitely tune in to Deb's podcast. You have such an incredible array of people who are offering such practical tools, and people can put them to practice the minute that they go back into the workplace.
It
So
is, it's, you know what, we're hitting 1 year next month. I really can't believe it. We're hitting 100 episodes, but
congratulations.
there's no barriers, there's no boundaries, it's multi-sector, it's people with grade 7 education to people that have multiple degrees, including more than one PhD. And leadership comes in all different packages and it's inclusive. It belongs to everyone. You don't have to have schooling or a title to be a leader. And that's probably the biggest paradigm shift that I've wanted to do over the last year. So been having a lot of fun and I'm glad you enjoy it. That's lovely feedback. Thank you.
You are so welcome. And thank you so much for your time today. You gave such beautiful, meaty insight into each question that whoever's listening in will be able to run back and feel, I think, a major breath of fresh air and sense of support coming right from you. And so when people want to find more about you and about your podcast, where can they go?
They can find me on debcrowe.com, and Crow has an E on the end.
Deb Crowe, heard it here
Deb
first.
Crowe, it's one word, right?